Hello everyone, Ace here, and today let's talk about the Trump class of battleship that has been recently announced. An idea that, at its core, is one of the more out there as far as the realm of military equipment procurement. It has drawn a fair bit of criticism, and it's not difficult to see why. That said, I am of the opinion that if everyone is thinking the same, then someone isn't thinking. And so to that end, I believe someone has to take up the contrarian position, and so I might as well here. To be clear, I'm not entirely sold on this ship as being an inherently good idea, but I do believe a case can and should be made as to why it should be tested as a concept. For what it's worth, as some of the people that have been critical of the design, such as for example Arch, have pointed out, it is of note that the United States does appear to have the naval dock space available to be able to build two of these ships without impeding progress on the construction of aircraft carriers, which is to say that the construction of two battleships with the apparent specifications of the Trump class would neither interfere with or impair the current plans of the US Navy. Now, for what it's worth, I haven't actually bothered to confirm what Arch has said here, so consider this as a case of me taking him on his word on that. I simply see no reason to disbelieve him on those estimates. But the main takeaway here is, assuming that is the case, then it would mean that the construction of these ships, even under a worst case scenario, would be to a minimal detriment of the combat capabilities of the US Navy. As it stands now, the US Navy is still the supreme naval power in the world, and her aircraft carriers still absolutely dominate the oceans. The construction of these two battleships would not in any way change that, at least if the design is a failure anyways. And keep in mind, yes, Trump did state a plan of eventually having at least 10 of these ships, but in practical terms it would appear that the first two are being constructed as a proof of concept, which makes sense if you're testing out what is essentially a radical new idea. Because while these are supposed to be battleships, they are of course a very different beast from what we would expect circa 1945. Some might suggest that it is silly to call them battleships. However, I would counter by pointing out that other ship classes have seen their roles change significantly over the course of their service. The role and combat capability of the destroyer, for example, has changed and evolved so much over its course of existence that it is essentially unreasonable to compare the ships from the 1900s to their modern day counterparts. But let's move on to the actual meat and potatoes of this video. Why would you even want to build such massive ships as battleships if smaller ships could do the job? After all, you could build more of the smaller ships and therefore have less of your eggs in one basket. And this is a very reasonable concern to have. It is also, however, built upon the assumption that smaller ships could effectively wield some of the equipment that is expected to be put onto the Trump class. The first big one I should mention is the laser defense system that is expected to be on the Trump class. Should these ships launch at the time that they are expected, they will be equipped with the most powerful lasers ever fielded by any military in the world, and not by a small amount either. The low estimates suggest that the ships will be equipped with two 300 kilowatt lasers. For contrast, the most powerful laser system about to be put into use by any military in the world is the Israeli Iron Beam system, which is rated at only 100 kilowatts, so 1/3 as powerful as the 300 kilowatt system. I should also mention that the Iron Beam system that the Israelis are using has an effective range of over 6 miles. Additionally, I should also mention, and this is another possibility, that Lockheed Martin is currently developing a 500 kilowatt laser system, and these new Trump class ships, well, it would stand to reason that they would be designed to be able to be future-proofed and therefore retrofitted with more powerful lasers as time goes on, as well as potentially more of them. With this in mind, it starts to make sense to have a ship that is actually larger in size, with a more potent power plant, and also with potentially larger battery banks, as well as the wiring necessary to be able to sustain these very power-hungry laser systems, as well as the much more power-hungry laser systems that will come later. And this moves me on to the next point. With the development of laser technology being at the pace it currently is, how long do you really think it's going to be before we start seeing laser systems that can destroy missiles from 20 miles away or 30 miles away? Keep in mind, the Iron Beam is already rated at being able to do that at 6 miles away, and is only a third as powerful as the weaker options, and only a fifth as powerful as the 500 kilowatt option. In theory, if you're able to get a laser system that's powerful enough, it might actually become rather difficult to destroy your ship with missiles, because they can just keep getting shot down over and over and over again. The big question is whether or not laser technology can advance to such a degree and to such a pace that it would be feasible for such a reality to occur. In that regard, making a big ship that can absolutely handle whatever electrical requirements you throw at it does start to make a little bit more sense. Now, yes, it is always theoretically possible that you could overwhelm the laser defense system if you throw enough missiles at it. The big question then would become whether or not it is practical for opposing military forces to be able to do that in the first place. My point here is that lasers do, at least in theory, seem to have the potential to be a major game changer when it comes to strategy and tactics. Of course, if lasers do end up becoming that effective, and that is at the end of the day an if, let's be honest, it does also lead to the question, what can you expect to utilize to counter the laser system? If the enemy is able to produce their own laser defense system that is capable of shooting down your missiles more than you can fire at the enemy, then what is your counter to that? And I believe this is where the railgun may actually have potential as an effective weapon system, because the railgun can offer an option that missiles cannot. A kinetic energy weapon that doesn't require its own propellant in any capacity. No explosive charge that could explode if hit by a laser, and no rocket fuel that could potentially explode if hit by a laser. So you know, the way that lasers typically destroy incoming projectiles. That simply wouldn't be a factor if the railgun was capable of firing kinetic energy projectiles on its own. Sounds like a silly idea, but you could even, in theory, make it a smart munition as well, essentially enabling you to carve the perfect path through an enemy ship, hitting engine, ammo, and everything else that really doesn't like being shot at. In summary, I would suggest that the Trump class is a proof of concept of two different weapon systems in particular. The laser defense system as well as the railgun, the latter of which is a potential counter to enemy laser defense systems. Now, like I said, there is no guarantee that this is a good idea. It could very well be that the Trump class is a flop, that these weapon systems are simply too new and too untested to be the revolutions to warfare that they have the potential to be in theory. That said, due to the way things stand now, I am of the opinion that it is at least worth building two of these ships to see if the technology is actually as good as it has the capacity to be on paper.